Okay. Thank you all for letting me come out. I really appreciate it. My name is Ruiz Evans. I just wrote a book called California's Next Century 2.0, Economic Renaissance. It's available at Amazon in both print and electronic format. If you type in Ruiz Evans or California's Next Century 2.0, book reviews, articles, different reviews from news agencies, and 11 interviews pop up. I'm going to give a speech that I've given in about 40 California cities already, roughly dispersed between the Bay Area, Sacramento, the Central Valley, LA, San Diego, and the Inland Empire. I've made a real effort to try to get this exact same message to everybody. Most of those videos are online on YouTube. If you type in Ruiz Evans, you'll be able to see them. Additionally, I tried to make sure that of all of the groups that I went to, that they were well-rounded. So this is my second peace organization in California that I've gone to. And it's, I've spoken at a union, SEIU, but I also spoke at a Republican Party in Livermore. And I spoke at 5 Libertarian chapter parties up and down California. And here's the thing. They all got the exact same message, and they all liked it. Now, real quick, you don't have to answer, but just think to yourself, when is the last time you ever heard about a political plan that Republicans and union members like equally as much? I'll take it that you haven't heard of anything like that in a long time. Well, this is it. There's something for conservatives and there's something for liberals. Everybody who's in California gets something. No, not everybody gets everything that they want, but a bunch of people get a large amount of what they've always wanted for a long time. All in one plan and unable to be pulled apart. That's the intro. So, I'm going to give a talk about the history of California, how California's government is going right now, but then also where the world is going and how that relates to California. It's going to get a little bit negative. It's not going to be a happy topic, but don't worry, because I'll come back around with the solution at the end. So first, the thing that you should know about California is that we don't have any money problems. We don't have any money problems at all. We have more money than we know what to do with. You just never get to see it. For 30 years, you have paid $80 to $120 billion. That's 80 to 120 billion with a B dollars in extra federal income taxes that you have literally never seen anything for. You have done this for 30 years in a row. When you add that up, it gets to be in the $300 to $500 billion range. You've never gotten anything for that. So when you pay federal income taxes, it goes to pay for things like military defense, Social Security, farm aid, etc. All good things that you should definitely support. And then there's 80 to $120 billion, 80 to 120 left over that does not go to pay for any services that you use. It goes in the form of grants from Washington, D.C. to pay for roughly 35 other states to have roads, bridges, dams, seaports, airports, levees, federal buildings, government buildings, and schools better than you have. Now here's the kicker. Every year, since roughly the 70s, the federal government rates infrastructure for all 50 states. And every year the federal government gives a report ranking all the infrastructure. For the last 30 years, California has had the worst infrastructure in all considerations according to the federal government. So, here's a list of all 50 states, put California almost dead last for schools, roads, dams, bridges, seaports, airports, levees, you name it. But, look at that same list. Now imagine this top 2/3. These people have already had schools, roads, bridges, dams, seaports, airports, levees better than you according to the federal government for decades. Yet every single year you pay $80 to $120 billion to make sure that they continue to have roads, bridges, dams, seaports, airports, levees, federal buildings, government buildings, and anything else you can name it that's basic infrastructure. You've done this for 30 years. I call that being milked almost to death. Most Californians, when I've presented this to them in 40 California cities, are completely unaware of this and have never heard what I'm talking about. How many of you have heard what I just mentioned before? Or were aware? You were? Okay. Anybody else? That's roughly the same percentage. 40 cities in a row, 1 or 2 people out of the entire group has heard something about this, and the entire rest of the group hasn't. So most Californians don't know that they're losing 80 to 120 every single year. Now here's the kicker. You pay that money to make sure that other states have infrastructure better than you. They already have it better than you. You make sure that they continue to have it better than you. You've done this for 30 years. 80 to $120 billion is the exact same amount as the entire state of California's budget. So you are wasting one entire state of California budget on welfare and good services for other people when you already have things worse than them. Now I'm just going to ask real quick, you don't have to answer, but does that seem fair? We have poverty, we have the worst ghettos, we have the worst roads, we have the worst schools. Oh, but let's make sure we pay for other people to continue to have it better than us. I was at one of these events and someone was saying, but they need it. Yeah, they need it. But guess what? The worst ghettos in all of America are in California. So if we're talking about need, we are the neediest. And when we're talking about money, it's your money that's being taken away from you to make sure you don't have massive poverty and injustice in California, to make sure other people are taken care of. But it gets worse. Because for the services that you do pay, you don't actually get. Now, every nation on the planet considers border security one of every government's goals. Federal government doesn't do border security. You pay federal income taxes, it goes to pay for that. They do not provide services. So your state government dips into the state budget to provide extra CHP at the border so that you have enough personnel to actually guard your border. They've done this for decades. So you're paying for a service, you never get it, the state dips into the state tax again to pay for that same service that was never got. That's a 200% tax. But it gets worse. Every government on the planet considers national security one of the jobs of the government, but not the federal government, and not when it comes to California. How many of you knew that for 5 years after 9/11, you never got your 9/11 security money? Anybody know that? For half a decade after 9/11, California never received its 9/11 security money to make sure that it was not blown up by terrorists. I am not exaggerating. Do you know who actually paid for you to have nuclear radiation detectors at the seaport so terrorists couldn't sneak a nuclear bomb into California? You did. So you pay federal income tax, it goes for national security, you get none. Then truckers are charged a $20 to $30 surcharge on every container that comes through the port of LA, Long Beach, and Oakland. That comes in, which means the local goods from those truckers for the California economy goes up. So now you pay extra for local goods to provide for national security you already paid for. That's another 200% tax. But it gets worse. Most countries on Earth consider national emergencies to be a job of the national government to get involved. Every single year, California has forest fires. They're declared national emergencies. That means feds get involved. Guess what happens? They never do. This started with Schwarzenegger. So what happens is you pay for money into the federal pot for national emergencies like New Jersey and New Orleans. Then it never happens. Your governor then dips into the state budget to take money to buy helicopters and personnel in nearby states so that you actually have the adequate firefighting personnel when you have these forest fires, so that you don't have all of LA burned alive. So that's the federal government, you're paying them for this job, they never do it, then you dip into your state taxes again to pay for the service. So that's $80 to $120 billion, or one state budget that you give away every year. Then you pay for national security, you never get it. You pay for border security, you never get it. You pay for national emergencies, you never get it. How many of you are pleased with that arrangement? Just, you're pleased? Okay. Okay, right. But it gets worse. We've been in this recession for 5 years. It's the worst recession in the century. California is the worst hit state in all of America. Schwarzenegger got a bunch of California business leaders together. They went to Asia. They met business leaders. They worked out the negotiations. They signed contracts. They got all the kinks worked out. They got all the paperwork ready. Schwarzenegger comes back to America, goes to Washington, D.C., hands the paper literally on the president's desk and says, "Please, Mr. President, we are in the middle of a recession. Approve these trade acts so that California can get 100,000 new jobs in the middle of this recession." That was during George W. Bush. He sat on that for 5 years. Here's the kicker. Barack Obama did the exact same thing. Barack Obama, George W. Bush, both sat on the trade deals for 5 years each, meaning that Californians never got 100,000 new jobs during the middle of this recession. And yet both presidents say that they care about us in this recession. Why did you stand in front of our way to get ourselves out? But it gets worse. Remember that $80 to $120 billion you pay every year in extra taxes? So that's about, let's say, $400 billion. So how many of you are familiar with unemployment insurance? I don't view unemployment insurance as welfare. I think you pay into the system. When it's time, you take out of the system because you paid into. That's a form of insurance. That's your money. You deserve it. California has been paying this extra surplus for 30 years. Yet when we're in a recession, Schwarzenegger went to the federal government in 2010 and said, "Can I have $20 billion for a bailout for this once-in-a-century recession?" No. Instead, California was ridiculed and chided in national newspapers, all of them, when Schwarzenegger made that request, saying that California is full of spendthrift, spend-happy liberals who have no fiscal discipline and they deserve everything that they did. And they put themselves in this financial situation, so America should not bail them out. They did it to themselves. They deserve everything they get. This is all documented in the book. You pay $400 billion into the system. You ask for $20 billion once. No. You're a bad person. You don't know how to handle your own money. You get nothing but a bunch of insults. All documented. Does that sound fair? But it gets worse. Because banks have said that the California economy is frankly too large to ever be bailed out by the federal government. There's a term called the lender of last resort. And what that means is that the national economy is the ultimate bank in case things go bad. So if California really needed some financial help, America's supposed to be able to come up with the money to shore up California. That's the role of every single national government on every country on earth. It's called the lender of last resort. However, financial institutions have said that the California economy is too large in comparison to the national economy to ever be bailed out by America. So if we need help, we're frankly too big for America to help bail us out. So that $400 billion you put into your unemployment insurance, you're paying for an insurance policy you can never cash in on. So let's review. You waste one full state budget. You pay for multiple services that you never get. You are blocked from getting yourself out of this recession. And you have an insurance policy you pay for faithfully and you never get anything out of it and you'll never be able to claim it. But now it gets worse on a whole other level. That was all the problems with California. Now I'm going to talk about problems with the world. And I'm going to come back around. The solution to California's problems is the same solution to the world's problems. So let me explain what the problem with the world is right now. And then I'll explain how you can fix it. In the next 20 to 30 years, there are going to be new global superpowers. Their names will be Russia, China, India, Brazil, Europe, America, and possibly a Southeast Asian collective known as ASEAN, that's ASEAN. Going to happen, nothing will stop it. It's not that America is going down, but that everybody's coming up. The term's called the rise of the rest. Basically, from World War II until about 1990, there was a war called the Cold War. America stood on one side as the best example of democracy and capitalism. And while it had problems, it was way better than the other alternative, the USSR with communism. Dictatorial control over everyone's lives and the economy. Now, most of the world sided with America because the other option was so horrible. But something happened about 1985. America became the victim of its own success. It won the Cold War. And what happened was everybody now thinks that capitalism and some form of democracy is the way to go. China has democracy. It's at a very low level, at the community level, and they have a capitalist economy. They love making goods, they love money, they love selling and buying and trading. They're nothing like America. So what happens in the future when America is no longer the only example of democracy and capitalism, but is only one of 7? Are you sure that the world is going to side with America the way it did after World War II, when now there's 6 other options? 6 other superpowers with their own version of democracy and capitalism, and their own willingness to make new trade agreements. But it gets worse. Because each one of these new superpowers is pulling out of the international organizations that have held peace since World War II. The main organizations that we have had as a global community to keep peace around the world for the last century, all of the new superpowers, as they rise in power, are pulling themselves out of these organizations. China's going to less UN meetings. China's making something called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's literally a UN made by China, where they invite countries around China and other people that they like, and they specifically ban America. Russia's doing the exact same thing. India's doing the exact same thing. Brazil's doing the exact same thing. And ASEAN is looking at the same thing. They're pulling out of the world centers, they're making their own UN, and they're saying, no America in my UN. By the way, no American politician talks about this. We don't have this discussion. There's no solution to it. We have absolutely no idea about what's going on, and there's no solution to this. I'm close to literally the only person bringing this up. So, there are American foreign policy scholars who say that the period that we are going to enter into in the next 20 to 40 years, guaranteed, most closely resembles an earlier period in history. The period from 1880 to 1910. You may know that as the lead up to World War I and World War II. Here's why. In 1880, the world was controlled by European powers, mostly England and France. A couple others, the Austrian League, etc. But then there were new powers who rose up. And they wanted to be as big and powerful as France and England, and they wanted their piece of the pie in their colony. Their names were Germany, Italy, and Japan. And for a while they went out and they conquered sections of the globe and made colonies just like the other European powers, and all the European powers traded, and things worked out for a while. I'm not arguing the morality of colonialism, but that was the way the economy worked at that time. Somewhere along the line, Germany quits the League of Nations and walks out. Japan leaves the League of Nations and walks out. Italy walks out of the League of Nations. And then within a year or two you have World War I, World War II, etc. Some people consider this one long war. So, we have new organizations now, as they rise to power, pulling out of the world centers and making their own. That's exactly what happened leading up to World War I and II. I'm not saying this, American foreign policy scholars are saying this, and your politicians are literally not talking about this at all. Fact, happening now, not discussed. So, what do? Do we just let the world order spin out of control and, we'll see if World War III happens or not? Maybe it won't. Take a gamble. The biggest gamble in your life. Do we see if California gets out of this recession on its own? Maybe. There's some economists saying that we're going to be in a permanent recession, that we're not going to go up, we're just going to go to a new lower plateau. There's some economists saying it's going to be another 5 years. There's some saying it's another 20 years. So do we just wait and see if the recession gets better and see what happens? And wait and see if we have World War III, see if it happens? I'm arguing we don't do that. I'm arguing that we as Californians, and when I say Californians, I mean everybody in the borders of this state, pursue an option that will literally save our economy, make us recession-proof for the next century, get us out of this recession now, get us all those jobs, improve schools, improve the roads, the dams, the seaports, the airports, the teachers, everything. Bring us up to first world status and is at the same time the exact same solution to save the world order. Tall order, I know. But you should know something. I've already received positive book reviews from Midwest Book Review, San Francisco Book Review, Californiality, and the LA Daily News. In addition, my book is being viewed by 4 different independent think tanks, the Pacific Independent, Milken, and Claremont Institute, and recently Michael Dukakis agreed to review the book. Now here's the radical solution. How many of you have heard what Scotland's done in the last 5 years? Okay, sorry. For the last 400 years, Scotland was a colony of England. There was a few Scottish people in London in the Parliament, but British people decided what happened in Scotland. That makes them a colony. In the last 5 years, as in these 5 years, Scotland has moved to be what they call almost 98% policy independent, with the military and all security issues and the British pound completely intact. So all Scottish boys and girls still serve in the UK military. They went to Afghanistan, and recently the Queen of England gave them a commendation for the 3rd Scots Brigade's valor in Afghanistan, and that's post this more independence. The British pound is controlled by England, not by Scotland, but yet the economies of England and Scotland have actually grown closer together. Intermarriage rates between English and Scottish people have actually gone up. And recently they announced that James Bond was actually a Scotsman. They have moved and shifted to where Scotland does not control its military or its security issues or its dollar, but now it has control over its border, immigration, education, schools, seaports, airports, levees, dams, pretty much every issue you deal with. How many of you remember how we got into this recession? They sold bad home loans, then they repackaged those into one giant group and misnamed it as something and sold it to another person who didn't know what they were buying, those junk bonds. Well, if we did this, would not have control over the dollar. But what I want to point out is that while Scotland doesn't have control over the British pound, if you pull that kind of junk in Scotland, you go to prison for 30 years. Now, how many of you can name one American banker or real estate investor who's gone to prison for their role in the collapse of our economy? Anybody? Yeah, that's right. Nobody's gone to prison in America. Nobody's going to go to prison in America, ever. We wouldn't have control over our dollar, but we would have the ability to make sure these stupid behaviors that got us into this dramatic recession are never allowed. And when they do, people see hard time. That will never happen in America right now. In Scotland, people are already in prison for trying this. So while you don't have everything with the military and the dollar intact, you do have a lot of freedoms. The system that Scotland has pursued is called subnational sovereignty. That's subnational sovereignty. They invented it, and they got it through 5 years of debate. The worst thing that happened in this transition that Scotland did in the 5 years was harsh language. The Prime Minister of England walked over to Scotland and said, "This will destroy the British Empire." Well, that was 5 years ago. Guess what? England's still there. And the economies between the two of them have risen. And recently, the Prime Minister of England has been meeting with the new Prime Minister of Scotland and becoming best friends. There's a picture of them holding hands. 25 other nations around the world have this exact same form of government. They are found in all sections of the globe and all cultures, which means that subnational sovereignty is a universally applicable form of government found everywhere. All of these countries have had this form for decades to a century. All of them are democracies. All of them are stable economies. All of them have great relations with their host nation. If we go back to the previous century, there's another 25 subnationally sovereign forms of government that existed at that time. It is a rare form of government, but it's stable and it's found everywhere. And Scotland recently did it. By the way, they're not the only ones. Iceland's looking into this. Liechtenstein, Quebec. There's about 5 others. It's all in here. Besides the 25 that already exist, there are multiple nations in Europe looking into this right now because they see it as the solution. If we had that 98% policy freedom, military's intact, homeland security, all the defense issues, and the dollar's intact, but you get control over all of the other issues. And you get to keep the $120 billion you waste every year. And you're now in charge of your own border security, your own national security. Well, not national security, but national emergencies. Which means you're not going to pay somebody for something you never get. Which means you only pay for services you use. And you don't pay for other people to have things when you have it worse. If you did this, here's a couple things that you could automatically do within the next 5 years. Number one, improve every single public school in all of California to the 1970s first world standard. Every single one. Number two, you can make university education almost free like it was in the 1960s. Number three, we could almost eliminate ghettos as we understand them today. Number four, we could make about 400,000 new white-collar jobs and about 200,000 new blue-collar jobs. Number five, all of your roads, seaports, dams, airports, levees, bridges, federal buildings, which are the worst in all of America, would be returned to first world status. How many of you remember the Golden State era? Pat Brown, 1960s, 1970s California? Does anybody remember that? Okay. They called us the Golden State at that time. We built infrastructure. We made the best schools in the world. We made the best universities in the world, and we made them almost free. We solved our water problem with California Aqueduct. We solved our education problem with the university system. We did some of the first policy decisions banning discrimination in housing, banning discrimination against women, banning discrimination against minorities, all at the same time. We can return to that Golden State era where people's rights and infrastructure and the quality of the economy and the quality of the education and the quality of life just goes up. Things have been bad in California since about the 80s. Well, that matches up exactly when the Golden State era ended and when you started paying this $80 to $120 billion in extra taxes you never receive anything for. So you are prevented from returning to the Golden State era. If you pursued subnational sovereignty, you'd actually have a chance to keep what you make and make your society the best in the world. But it gets better. Because California is also the solution to world peace. And you would have to have subnational sovereignty to take over this role. So you remember how I said new countries are rising up and they're pulling out of the world centers of peace? If you type in a little city called Geneva, Switzerland, you will find that most of the agreements between nations and between international corporations were agreed upon in that one city, Geneva, Switzerland. And your first peace agreements, military warfighting agreements, telephony, internet, shipping, seaports, immigration, all Geneva, Switzerland. Take a look for it. In the last 2 years, the mayor of Geneva and the government of Switzerland have issued official reports saying they can no longer be the neutral negotiation center of the world as they've been for the last 2 centuries. They are literally giving up the economy and walking away. Why are they doing that? Because the world's changed. 200 years ago, when the world was owned by European countries, a country that was made up of French, German, and Italians, and also spoke English, could go to Europe and say, we know your culture, we speak your language, and yet we're the living embodiment of all of you living together. Europe, make us Swiss people your neutral negotiation center. 200 years ago, Switzerland made that argument to Europe. 200 years ago, the Europeans bought it. But now, Europe will only be one superpower. We need a new center that's made up of all of the new superpower peoples with their cultures intact who have lived together in peace for a very long time. Now, can any of you guess where that place might be amongst all peoples across the entire planet? So, that's absolutely correct. I look around the world, California is the only place, land, people, area, you name it, that has all of the 7 superpowers peoples having lived together for over a century. No other place in the entire planet comes remotely close. Israel comes somewhat close, but they've only got 3 of the 7 superpowers. We've got all 7. So there's Israel, and then a gigantic gap, and then us, and then basically nobody else on the planet who has what the Swiss had 200 years ago. So what I'm saying is that if you had the freedom to have more control over your economy, you could shift your economy to become the new Swiss for the next century. You are the only place that can do it. No one else on earth can do it, and no one else on earth is talking about how the world order is spinning out of control. So if California does not do this, it literally will not happen, and we will all wait and see if World War III erupts on its own. I'm not exaggerating, documented in the book. These are not my opinions. I have 250 citations. The book's 500 pages long. I'm interested in things that are news but aren't popularly talked about. This is out there. Your politicians just don't want to talk about it because it scares them. How are you going to save the world order for the last century? I don't know. That's what they're thinking. So they don't talk about it. Everything's fine, America's great, the world order's fine, nothing's happening, no problems. That's what you hear, right? You never hear politicians talk about this. It's happening, they don't have a solution. Guess what's going to happen? It's us or nobody. Now, if California makes the move to become the global neutral negotiation center for the superpowers of the next century, then it will have what Swiss had. Now, there's a couple things you need to understand. Switzerland has been the richest country in the world for 200 years, richer than any other country. Switzerland has had the highest social standard of living in the entire planet for the last 100 years. Switzerland has the lowest unemployment in all of the world today. And Switzerland effectively never has a recession and effectively doesn't ever have unemployment. I'll repeat that. Switzerland effectively never has recessions, and Swiss people effectively never have unemployment. There are effectively no ghettos in Switzerland. Effectively, all of the public schools are top quality. Now, how did they get that? Well, it's not luck. The world economy goes up, it comes down, things fluctuate. But no matter how bad things are, countries still need to negotiate, corporations still need to make neutral deals. Switzerland always has people and ideas and money coming in even when things are bad. They have effectively a recession-proof economy because of the service they supply to the globe. So they always have good economic times and they never have any bad economic times. If we did what they do, if we were the neutral negotiation center, us Californians, we would have all of the economic benefits of Switzerland, which means we would be out of this recession. And when you talk to your kids, grandkids, nieces, and nephews, you would never really need to explain what a recession is, or what being unemployed is, or what having to look for a job is, or what not knowing to be able to tell your child to plan ahead because I don't know if the economy is going to be strong in 10 years is. That would be wiped out. That's a promise. The only question is, are we willing to make this shift? You pursue subnational sovereignty, you get one free state of California budget. That means you could lower taxes by 50% at the exact same time that you raise the school budget 200%. That means you can make businesses stay at the same time that you can make public schools the best for every child in California, and that there is no such thing as a poor quality education for any child in California at the exact same time. This is what I meant when I said I spoke at unions, and I've spoken at Republican Party chapters, and Libertarian chapters, and peace chapters, and everybody gets the exact same speech, and everybody's interested. Tell me the last time that you have ever heard of a union organization emailing to other unions a libertarian video. Happened. Here it is. Now, I've asked that question in a couple different cities. Nobody's ever heard of something like that. Here it is. So if we're talking about bipartisanship, if we're talking about what real Californians want, if we're talking about being able to provide for everybody, here it is. And by the way, no politicians have any idea when the recession is going to get out, when it's going to end, or how to do it. And no politicians are even talking about how the world order that kept peace is disintegrating. So right now, this is the only book talking about it and the only book with the solution. maybe there is another solution. You're going to have to get your politicians to get out there and start talking about it, because right now they're not. And by the way, clock's ticking. I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to questions.